Alright, what's going on everyone? Edge of Eternities is nearly upon us, and with it comes two new commander decks. Now, the purpose of this video is just to give a brief overview of the decks. I don't have time to go over all 100 cards in both decks, but I hope to give you a general idea of what the decks do, so you can decide which deck is best for you. Now, something unique about these Edge of Eternities decks is each one has a regular commander and a legendary spacecraft, which you can use for your commander with the recent rules change where you can use vehicles or spacecraft as your commander. So both of these are viable. Also, if you don't know how the spacecraft card type works, they're like vehicles. You crew them, but when you crew them, they get charge counters based on the power of the creature, and once it becomes crewed, it's a creature permanently. So anyway, let's start by taking a look at World Shaper. This is a Jund Lands deck with Hearthrall, the World Seed, and Zerol Genesis Shepherd as the commanders. You can pick either one. The spacecraft can sacrifice lands to draw cards and then let you play additional ones, which ideally you're going to draw more as you sacrifice. Just lots of card draw, lots of extra lands. If you can animate it, it becomes a 6/7 with flying and vigilance that makes everyone at the table lose 2 life whenever you sacrifice a land, which is certainly game ending because this deck is very heavily focused on sacrificing lands. The insect will let you play lands from your graveyard. That is very relevant. There's lots of ways to sacrifice lands. There's lots of ways to play multiple lands per turn. There's lots of lands that sacrifice themselves. And then whenever you sacrifice a non-token, so that's going to include your lands or anything that's not a clue token or a treasure token or whatever, you put +1/+1 counters on another creature equal to its power, or this creature's power. I think the main draw here is actually just playing lands from your graveyard. It's going to be pretty huge if you choose this as your commander. So this deck has a lot of traditional lands matter cards like Augur of Autumn, Tireless Tracker, Rampaging Baloths. Nothing crazy here, you've seen this before. Augur of Autumn lets you play lands off top. Tireless Tracker is a draw engine when you play lands. Baloths make a 4/4 every time you play a land. Very traditional, these are in like every landfall deck ever. It also has tons of ramp, it has your Harrows and your Farseeks and your Nature's Lures, things like this. You're going to be ramping, you're going to be caring about playing lands. However, this deck has a very heavy focus on sacrificing lands. So you get things like the Get Rog Monster, Corvold, God Eternal Bontu. All of these let you sacrifice lands to draw cards. Just like your spacecraft, sacrifice lands, draw, sacrifice lands, draw, play more lands. You have things that let you play multiple lands per turn. So you're going to be drawing and drawing and drawing, playing tons of lands, sacrificing, drawing, and it's buffed by a bunch of new cards for this type of deck, like Avindo, Bushraiser, Baloth Prime, Scouring Swarm. The first gives you a card whenever you sacrifice something, and it lets you sacrifice lands to ramp, which we have plenty of ways to replay them from the graveyard or just take advantage of them from the graveyard. Baloth Prime is a 4-mana 10/10, however it enters with 6 stun counters on it, but you can remove those stun counters, or rather it untaps itself, which, removes the stun counter. That's how that works. But whenever you sacrifice a land, you remove a stun counter, and it makes a 4/4. So that's pretty crazy, and it has a built-in way to sacrifice lands. It might not look impressive, but that sacrifice land ability, it's 4 mana, sack a land, remove a stun counter, gain 2 life, and make a 4/4, right? Because it's going to trigger its own ability. So 4 mana, 4/4, gain 2, remove a stun counter, and sacrificing lands, not a bad thing in this deck. Scouring Swarm will make a 1/1 flyer every time you sack a land, so it's like the inverse of a Scoot Swarm. And if you have 7 or more lands in your graveyard, it's going to make copies of itself instead of a 1/1. So yeah, it's basically Scoot Swarm, except instead of landfall, it is sacrifice. And it has flying. Bit harder to get to the duplication part because you need 7 lands in your graveyard, though it could be easier in a self-mill deck, but you're making flying copies of Scoot Swarm basically. And this deck leans so heavily into sacrificing lands that it actually just has a bunch of Jund sacrifice stuff as well. Lots of things that just get more powerful when you sacrifice stuff, which is a little bit more out of the ordinary for a landfall deck, right? And there's tons we don't have time to talk about. There's lots of sacrifice matter stuff. There's a lot lots of ways to sacrifice lands. There's stuff that cares about lands in the graveyard. There's a way to return lands from the graveyard, and plenty of new cards that power up this land sacrifice strategy, whether it's giving you extra benefit from doing so or enabling you to do so. Yeah, just lots of sacrificing lands. That's the key here. This is a land sacrifice deck. So while we have seen tons of landfall decks in the past with these commander precons, if you're specifically interested in a Jund land sacrifice deck with a lot of ways to gain value from sacrificing lands and replaying them from the graveyard, be sure to check out World Shaper. Our second deck is Counterintelligence, a Jeskai artifact deck that focuses on counters, specifically charge counters. This is very similar to the previous deck. We've seen so many Jeskai artifact decks, but this has a pretty interesting sub-package of charge matters stuff. First, the commanders. It has Inspirit, Flagship Vessel, and Kilo Apogee Mind. Inspirit is a 3-mana spacecraft that, if it has just one charge counter on it, every turn it can either put a +1/+1 counter or 2 charge counters on another artifact, and that's going to be very relevant. We'll talk about that in a second. And notably, if you put +1/+1 counters on something, you're basically powering something else up to then crew the spacecraft to make it a creature faster. And then once it's alive, it's a 5/5 flyer that gives all your other artifacts hexproof and indestructible. Kilo is a 3-mana 3/3 with haste that when it becomes tapped, it will proliferate. And again, that's very important. This is a counters matters deck, +1/+1 counters and charge counters, so proliferate is huge. And note, he doesn't necessarily have to attack. You can tap it to crew the spacecraft, which will trigger it, right? So, because it triggers on tapping, which is very useful. So, much like the previous deck, the base deck is Jeskai artifacts. It has a lot of typical stuff. Steel Overseer, Emery, Kappa Cannoneer, right? The first can tap, put +1/+1 counters on all your artifacts. Emery lets you cast artifacts from the graveyard, which is huge. Cannoneer just becomes big. Every time you play an artifact, it gets bigger and it's unblockable. Comes a bit of a wrecking ball in the late game. Typical artifact stuff, right? Typical staple artifact stuff. However, the unique aspect of this that kind of, gives it a little bit of a unique flair is stuff like Golem Foundry, Titan Forge, Lux Cannon. You see these sometimes, but they're always kind of so-so. But this deck is really leaning into this type of card. So Golem Foundry gets a charge counter whenever you cast an artifact, and then remove 3 to make a 3/3. So basically, you kind of get like a 1/1 every time you play an artifact, except you get a 3/3 every 3 you play, but you get the idea. Forge is similar. You have to pay 3, tap it to get a charge counter, and then you have to remove 3 charge counters for a 9/9, meaning you're ultimately paying 9 mana for a 9/9 over 4 turns, basically, right? Because that's to tap every time. So very, very slow. And likewise, the cannon can remove 3 charge counters to destroy something, which is awesome, but it takes 3 turns to get there. Every 4 turns, basically. So yeah, these are super, super slow. But remember, Inspirit, it can add 2 charge counters per turn. So if you combine this with Titan Forge, for example, you can make a 9/9 every single turn if you can just find one more way to add a charge counter, and that's the whole point of the deck. You have things like Thrumming Bird, Tezzeret's Gambit, Teguthal. All of these proliferate, allowing you to add extra charge counters to the previous artifacts. Thrumming Bird does it by attacking, and it has flying, so can usually find someone to ping for 1 to proliferate your board. The Gambit is a spell. Teguthal makes all your proliferates happen twice, and there's way more ways to proliferate than just this. There's even stuff like Core Tapper, right? Core Tapper, not that exciting, but Core Tapper plus your commander and the Titan Forge makes a 9/9 every turn. Your commander adds 2, the Core Tapper adds 1, and then you make a 9/9, and there you go. And that's the idea. This encapsulates the deck pretty well. This is what the deck is doing. This screen, here it is. Here's what you're trying to do. And we have plenty of new ways to add charge counters because they're trying to lean into the strategy. They gave us new stuff like Patrolling Peacemaker, Surge Conductor, Insight Engine. The first 2 proliferate. The Peacemaker does it whenever someone else commits a crime, which can actually be pretty punishing. If the opponents are killing stuff, proliferate every time. You can get that multiple times per turn cycle. It also enters with +1/+1 counters, so it's going to proliferate its own counters and get bigger. The Conductor proliferates whenever a non-token artifact enters under your control, so play something, proliferate all your charge counters, all your +1/+1 counters. And the Engine can add charge counters, and when you do so, you draw cards based on the number of charge counters, so big draw engine there. And there's even an alternate win condition with Darksteel reactor. This exists, of course, but 20 charge counters. 20 charge counters and you win, but that's a lot of charge counters. But in this deck, with all of the new ways to add charge counters, with your commander adding 2 per turn, with all the proliferation, might not be as hard as it once was. And of course, there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. There's more generally good artifact stuff. There's a ton of things that care about artifacts and counters, whether it's adding counters to itself or making tokens that care about counters like the shark, for example, which incubates and then you can proliferate the counters on the incubator tokens. There's cards that care about charge counters for various reasons, whether it's adding them, removing them, taking advantage of them in some way. There's ways to move counters, all kinds of charge counter stuff. There's proliferation. Proliferation, by the way, is also going to add charge counters to your spaceship. I do think the spaceship is the correct choice here as your commander. It's counters, counters, counters. So if you're interested in a Jeskai artifact deck that is a bit more focused on charge counters instead of +1/+1 counters or just going wide or whatever, counter intelligence, that might be the deck for you. And that's going to be it for our Edge of Eternities commander decks. I do think these decks are pretty interesting because, we've had so many commander decks at this point that we've started to retread a lot of the same ground. And I think these decks do a great job of taking themes we've seen already, but adding a little bit of flair and pushing them in a slightly different direction, which makes them a bit more interesting, I think. So yeah, those are the Edge of Eternities decks. I will leave links to the complete deck lists in the description below, as well as sponsored Amazon affiliate links, which does support the channel, but I do encourage you to support a local game store if you have one. Also, be sure to let me know which deck you're most interested in the comments below. And in the meantime, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video was useful. If it was, be sure to leave a like, and I will see you in the next one.